When the trailer for the live-action Teen Titans, simply titled Titans, was released in July of 2018, fans immediately took to the internet to express their caution, to put it nicely. "This will make Suicide Squad look like The Godfather," one remarked. "I'm starting to think DC doesn't like money," remarked another. "Another childhood memory ruined," said Philip. "Why, God? Why?" The show went on to premiere a few short months later to a surprisingly lukewarm reception, with the first season receiving a 78% from critics on Rotten Tomatoes and a flat 55 out of 100 on Metacritic, which is actually pretty good considering the greatest movies of all time, Scooby-Doo and its subsequent sequels, barely pushed 40 on Metacritic. Cowards. It was pretty much the same for Fate the Winx Saga, the Winx Club's edgier, far more boring successor. The fire aspect of that raging dumpster incineration was mainly fueled by the terrible outfits, which you've heard enough about if you're a returning subscriber of mine. With endless headlines that predicted the monstrosity, initial audiences claiming that Netflix purposely wanted to upset an entire generation with this release, and yet another call of it ruining their childhood, it's no surprise that Fate bombed on Rotten Tomatoes, earning a 37% from critics.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
Which brings us to the Powerpuff Girls live-action reboot, announced in August of 2020, was set to be just another gritty, aged-up cesspool of sex and debauchery and bad costuming. Now, I hate to get up here a mere 3 months after declaring hope in this project. I actually have high hopes for the new CW adaptation of the Powerpuff Girls, and admit that I was wrong. But what the? This reboot was so bad that it was ordered to be scrapped and reshot by the CW because it was too campy for the CW. The network that features shows like Riverdale, that in turn features teen pole dancing and teen prison football, said that the Powerpuff Girls reboot was too campy. That's embarrassing. But still, not even the promising description and more than questionable casting could absolve the audience of their distress. Upon announcing the show's development, fans instantly pushed back. Wait, so let me get this straight. They decided to turn a beloved children's cartoon into a dark, edgy, sexualized, and very adult show on the CW, as well as feature the professor, a caring and loving father, as someone who actively exploits his daughters for marketability and profit. That's like turning Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends into an R-rated horror film. Don't give them ideas. The reason I bring up all of these reboots, even the ones as obscure and forgettable as Titans and Fate, is because they all have something in common. They're reimaginations of beloved animated children's shows. They all have an aged up, gritty attitude about them that censors sex, dark themes, and polyester costumes from Party City. And they have all, without fail, been accused of ruining our childhoods. Enter stage left, iCarly. Now, I'm not going to sit here and pretend that there hasn't been backlash for this reboot because...
Wow, racism!
A lot of the ire stems from people being upset at the exit of Jeanette McCurdy, who played Sam, as well as the subsequent introduction of the beautiful Lacey Mosley and Jaden triplet. People have taken out that anger by stereotyping and attacking Lacey in particular, who happens to be a dark-skinned black woman, to the point where Netflix themselves had to release a statement. Other than that, the reception of the iCarly reboot has been fairly positive in all the circles that I have personally been in, and this is in spite of it having all the same elements as the previously mentioned failed reboots: sex, an aged up mature theme, and questionable fashion. We'll circle back to that later. This made me wonder, what sets the iCarly reboot apart from reboots like Fate, Powerpuff Girls, and Titans? What does it take for a reboot to have its intended audience reception? Well, it starts with who you know. When Kristen Wiig was announced to return as the voice of Gossip Girl for the revival, audiences everywhere felt a restored sense of peace in the project that previously was nothing more than a circus trampling on the ground of their favorite teen drama. The entire point of reboots, revivals, and sequels is to incite nostalgia in a viewer, which in turn ensures money for the showrunners. Just like everyone sung praise for the return of at least one original Gossip Girl cast member, the same more or less happened for the iCarly revival, to an even greater extent. Most of the original cast are reprising their roles for this reboot, save for Sam and Gibby, who by the way, is having a blast doing other things.
I'm 22, I'm balding, and I'm frustrated to say the least. It's been a dry con for Mudman. I'm hard all the time, boned up. I gotta do a tuck.
The writers made an executive decision to bring 2 new characters onto the project while keeping the remaining cast untouched, even going as far to bring back minor characters from the original like Mrs. Benson, Neville, and Nora. Taking that into account and considering that the new episodes follow the same established universe as the original show, that would technically make the new iCarly a sequel, or a revival in terms of television, rather than a reboot. According to Christopher McKittrick, there is a vast difference between sequels, reboots, and remakes, and this usually goes over our heads, judging by how much we use them interchangeably in the media. A sequel, as well as a revival, usually features all of the same characters and exists within the same universe as the original. It usually follows a new plot line, or it ties up loose ends of an old, unfinished plot. Think of the 56 different Fast and Furious movies, or the Twilight Saga, or... Oh, we don't talk about that? Oh, okay. Actually, Mean Girls 2 would be more of a reboot or a remake, according to McKittrick. He defines reboots as, quote, a new version of an older piece of media, doing an entirely new version of the same concept with no direct in-story connection to the original. Sure, Mean Girls 2 is set in the same high school and has the same principal, but it's more or less a rehashing of the original movie's plot, with an entirely new cast and less convincing acting.
Who said Coco Chanel? It was Abby.
And that's one of the things that sets the iCarly continuation apart from the other reboots we've seen in the past 2 to 3 years. Unlike Fate the Winx Saga that entirely reimagines the original concept of its predecessor, horribly, might I add, and the Powerpuff Girls reboot that technically happens in a universe where the original cartoon is a whitewashed marketing ploy, which makes no sense, iCarly indulges itself in references to the original source material. When people see the name of an old show attached to a new one, they expect more or less 3 basic things. The same cast, the same concept, or at the very least, the same gist of the original show. Looking at it as a whole, the iCarly revival satisfies audiences in a way that the previous reboots couldn't because it's not technically a reboot. It doesn't have to start over from scratch or suffer the consequences of originality. iCarly can go heavy with references to the original source material because the point of it is the nostalgia payout. Whereas reboots scrap and remake the world of source materials, sequels like iCarly sit comfortably in the knowledge that they can insert old jokes and references and get a positive reaction from viewers without it being too ham-fisted. That's why I think the introduction of the 2 new characters went over so poorly with viewers. You know, besides the racism part. It's because introducing something new to a show destined to be about nostalgia makes audiences quiver in fear. That's usually when the cause of a ruined childhood begins. After that, it all goes downhill from there. The iCarly theme song said it best. I know, you see, somehow the world will change for me. And that it did. Even though the running plot of the show is a continuation of the source material, the world around Carly has drastically changed in the past 10 years, and the writers make sure to capitalize off of that. The opening title sequence, once portrayed as an outdated computer screen, mirrors the refined interface of social media. Instead of filming with his bulky equipment, Freddy even just presses record on his Peerphone. The show even opens up with, and heavily depends upon, the use of live streaming and references to YouTube couple channels. We can't escape them even if we try. In a world where Carly was one of the only web show hosts of her time, she now has to compete in a digitized, social media-obsessed society. You know where this is going. The one gripe I do have with the first 3 episodes of the sequel, specifically the 3rd one, is the fact that the writing feels too advanced. Like they're trying too hard to make a deep statement about social media and the new generation. There's this heavy emphasis on how all Gen Zers care about is cancel culture, sometimes to the point of canceling people for silly things, which, wait, maybe they were onto something. It just feels done before. For a series that's supposed to be set in this contemporary age, it feels like we're still having the same conversation about social media, spearheaded by older people that we've been having for years by this point. These conversations feel stiff because it feels like a conversation the iCarly gang would have been having years ago, since social media dependence isn't a new thing in 2021. They push this notion that the youth are offended by this, the youth are canceling that. All the youth cares about are likes and comments and don't live fulfilling lives. Anyways, guys, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe so I can feel better about myself, and make sure to stay tuned to hear me talk about how offended I am by this show. I will include a fully detailed list of how we can cancel iCarly. Wait a minute. I truly do understand where the writers are coming from with this episode, but it feels so stiff. The dialogue only felt lacking in some areas, and I can assure you it's a world away from the mess that was the alleged leaked Powerpuff Girls script. The reason the iCarly sequel holds up better to that show, despite the Powerpuff Girls reboot not even airing as planned, is because it actually makes an effort to advance. Even though I think the social media commentary is dry, there are other aspects of the show that are obviously an attempt to cater to its original audience, who are all grown up now, and these attempts pay off. The Powerpuff Girls script, not so much. It was hard to read, mainly for the outdated dialogues and the forceful tropes we usually only see in Sabrina and Riverdale, which makes sense because of who's producing it. But even Riverdale tried to be modern, no matter how awkwardly done it was. It makes you wonder, who is writing the script for Powerpuff Girls? The zingy one-liners, the cartoonish references to, oh. As great as a writer Diablo Cody is, with such titles as Jennifer Body under her belt, the Powerpuff script feels like it was written in 2009, like Jennifer's Body. Anyone who watches that movie today can attest to the fact that the dialogue is certainly late 2000s. And that style of humor and one-liners don't work for a show set in a contemporary age because no one speaks like that anymore. Fine, we can talk about Titans now. You ever just think to yourself, man, I wish there was a show that reimagines childhood characters into mature, older characters that face new, matured problems that their younger counterparts only skimmed the surface of. But how will we know these characters are mature? Will they be self-aware, take accountability, have compassion, and practice humility? Oh, they just...
How are you doing that with your mouth?
Never mind how I'm doing it.
There's a rampant belief in other reboots of classic children's shows that a mark of maturity is dark themes, sex, and 40-year-olds playing teenagers, which I guess is somewhat true, but I think we all agree that it's overdone by this point. It was exciting with Pretty Little Liars, the original Riverdale, but in the 50 poorly written teen dramas since then, it's become rather boring. Other mature reboots feel like they missed the mark of maturity and dive straight into debauchery. It's what happened to Titans, and everyone pretty much sent it to the Shadow Realm because Robin said fuck Batman. Just to go off on a tangent here, the Titans reboot was said to be accurate to the source material since Robin has a history of going against the grain and having anger issues in the comics, hence the merciless beating he dishes out in the trailer. iCarly 2 tries to be a mature sequel to its childhood predecessor, but instead of banning it like most people did with Titans, people are applauding it on social media. Unlike the faux grown-up attitude of Powerpuff Girls or the dark, gritty maturity of Titans and Fate, Carly's maturity feels more natural. The show doesn't go to extreme lengths to prove that Carly is a mature adult, they just show it. There's no indiscernible scenes with low lighting or sex demons putting someone's boyfriend in bondage.
Letting sex demons whip you.
And for once, the wardrobe isn't a direct insult to my eyes. One of the first things that got Titans banished to obscurity was the less than realistic costuming they chose for Starfire. Now, disgusting insults and racism set aside, I do agree that they could have taken the time to figure out something else for Starfire's wardrobe because it does look rather cheap, for lack of a better word. And by the way, that's cheap as in Party City costuming and not cheap as in a misogynistic way. For instance, I love what they did with season 2 Starfire because she actually looks like a superhero and she's absolutely killing it. The thing with iCarly is the wardrobe comes swinging right out of the gate, even though a majority of it is almost boring in its normalcy. Fate and Powerpuff Girls also had boringly normal clothing, but that didn't work for their plots because those shows feature otherworldly creatures like fairies and mistakes that go against human nature. You expect much more from them in their wardrobe department because they have the ability to go above and beyond and not look sorely out of place like it would in regular sitcoms like iCarly. Carly, on the other hand, dresses like any other millennial because that's what she is. In the original show, Carly's style depended heavily on a mix of femininity and preppiness, because that more or less described her character's personality. In the revival, her outfits still reflect that feminine prep, but with an obvious attempt at sophistication and maturity. And we can't forget how iconic Harper's hairstyles were. See what magic happens when you let black stylists style black characters? It's the complete opposite of what happened to my girl Taylor in High School Musical. All of this adds up to create a well-balanced revival that beats out its competition, who all tried and failed to prove their maturity. The sequel shows that it's possible to create a mature piece of media without having to prove its maturity through explicit themes. Yes, Jerry Trainor runs butt-ass naked across the screen. Yes, Carly says the whitest shit ever known to mankind, and it's cute.
You gotta switch it up on a bitch.
But the show doesn't take itself too seriously or try too hard to prove it's about a matured cast. It just is. I think that's the reason the iCarly sequel fared as well as it did in its early stages compared to its predecessors. It doesn't have anything to prove. Not only is it a sitcom, but it has a guaranteed audience. And unlike other popular reboots, it makes sure to do the one job it's here for, cashing out on nostalgia. No drama, no complex storylines, or Oscar-nominated performances. Just a good old sequel of a good old sitcom doing what it was paid to do. Be iCarly. Now, I held off long enough, and I'm getting a bit antsy, so let me play us out with a song of my people. Jerry Trainor, if you're out there.